Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to set up some lights for the Blockhead Wildone. Nothing fancy, just a set of LEDs in the pods we can turn on and off from the transmitter. Right, we've got some yellow 5mm LEDs, although I'm thinking they might not be bright enough, but we're going to give them a try anyway. There's some resistors. Now these are 8th watt 220 ohm, so we won't be running the LEDs flat out, but that means they should just about last forever. Plus, if we need to change to the brighter white LEDs, they're going to be somewhere near the right value too. To connect them up, I've got some pre-wired BEC connectors, 3 so we can remove the top body and the top pods can just unplug. And lastly, we have a nice little RC switch. It is of course Chinese, but I'm sure it's going to be good enough. I got it from the seller Digital Cure on UK eBay, but I'm sure you'll find it on Banggood or AliExpress as well. It's supposed to switch 2 amps, which is way more than we need. The main thing is it doesn't need a separate power input. Rather, it just runs from the output from the receiver's power, which of course comes from the ESC's BEC. To control it, we need to set up a 2-position switch on the transmitter for on and off. The device itself looks pretty simple. There's an 8-pin microcontroller of some sort, a transistor or FET, probably a regulator on the other side, a few resistors and capacitors, and an indicator LED, which is all jammed onto a PCB not much bigger than the servo connector itself. Neat. To fit it, we're going to need to remove the top body and the driver. Then we just plug the servo end into channel 3 on the receiver, and so we can test it, I'm going to solder one of the resistors to an LED off camera, and we're going to stick the legs into the BEC connector. Remember, we do need to get it the right way around because it's an LED. If you want a detailed LED guide, I made a video a good few years ago that goes through how to hook them up, what resistors to use and all that sort of good stuff. Link in the description. If we turn the buggy on, the indicator LED starts to blink slowly, which means it's running but the output is turned off, as we can also see by our LED not being lit. If we click the channel 3 button on the transmitter, the indicator goes solid and our LED turns on, which is about as exciting as it's going to get. There's no flashing, fading, strobing modes, it's just a very simple on and off. But for this build, that's just what I want. For the wiring, there is a few bits to come together. First, we will connect one of the BEC leads to the switch. Its wires will end up going to the frontmost lights, which are chassis mounted. Next, there will be another BEC connector connected up in parallel, heading towards the back of the chassis, in effect making a Y lead, where we then connect the last connector, which goes up to the lights on the top of the body. Right, this isn't going to be a soldering guide, so we'll just go through the wiring build in stages. First, we'll cut the leads down to something more sensible and solder the 2 resistors to the end of the red wire. So there's 1 in and 2 out, and then with 2 red wires sized to reach the 2 lights. The black wires all just come together as a common connection. So things can't connect where we don't want them to, we're going to run a small bit of heat shrink over one of the resistors. Next, we'll use some slightly larger heat shrink where the black wires come together. And lastly, some even bigger heat shrink over the whole lot. Also, to keep things neat, I've twisted up the wires. What we've ended up with is a Y lead with 2 outputs for the front lights with resistors in line. As a diagram, it looks something like this. Plus, of course, when we get to it, there's the LEDs on the ends. Quick to put together, tidy, and should last pretty much forever. We'll need to remove the light pods from the chassis, which isn't as easy as I'd like. The mounting screws go up through the bottom, and the front suspension is very much in the way. We'll need to remove the front wheels, and the nuts that attach the arms, so we can move them sideways to access the screws. Then, with the pods free, we can remove the 2 screws that holds the 2 halves together, so they're ready for the LEDs. And speaking of the LEDs, I've soldered the wires and added some heat shrink to the back. Red to anode, the long leg, and black to the cathode, short leg. To mount them, we just put an LED in a pod and put the 2 halves back together. But there's another bit we need first, the lens. They do need cutting out, we just need to follow the lines moulded into the plastic. The lens fits in the slot, so we don't need to be too accurate, we just need to make sure that we cut just outside the line. Because the lenses are the same material as the body, they have an overspray film, or in the case of the lenses it's really just a protective film. We'll need to peel it off, Then we can pop the lens into the slot in one half of the pod, add an LED and offer up the other half. If they go together nicely, add some screws. If they won't quite come together, you might need to trim a little bit more from around the lens. Now we have one pod ready to fit, except the inside of it looks really ugly. The kit comes with some stickers that make it look more like a headlight lens, but where I can I like to avoid stickers. So I'm going to try painting the inside in Tamiya chrome silver and just see how it looks. If it doesn't look so good, we can always add the stickers later. With the pods dry and reassembled, I think it does look a bit better, but still not great. I'll go with it for now though, and just see how it looks when we've got all four mounted up. Reassembling the front is the reverse of the process of taking it all to bits. We just need to take care of the O-rings between the pods and the chassis. We don't want to do the screws up too tight and completely flatten them. We want a little bit of squish so the pods can still move if they get knocked. Now the pods are on, we can hook them up to the switch, connect a battery, and we can turn the buggy on. If we dim the lights, we can hit the button on the transmitter and see how they look. And well, that's a bit underwhelming. Even in person, they look a bit like a headlight from the 1910s, fireflies in jam jars. There are far brighter yellow LEDs around, and better ways to drive them, but I think I'm just going to swap them out for some cool white ones. So here they are a little bit later with the LEDs swapped. Yeah, that'll do, far brighter. The two upper pods on the body are exactly the same. The only difference is we need to drill a couple of small holes for the wires to pass through. Since it's pretty much the same, I'm going to do the whole lot off camera. As you can see, it really is all just the same. The only concern is the wires rubbing in the plastic and damaging the insulation. If we were going to really bash the buggy, I'd add an extra layer of heat shrink. But since this one isn't going to see too much action, I think it looks better with just the wires. It's a little less bulky. We have the same issue at the front, where a little extra protection would probably be a good idea. Otherwise, we just need to plug the LEDs in, offer up the body, and give it a test. And there we go, all four lights up and running. Probably not quite bright enough to drive by at night, but that's not really the point of them, they're just for show. There's one more thing to do. With the body off again, the wires for the front are a bit messy. There's a good chance they're going to end up getting caught up in the steering, so we need to tie them down along with the switch. Right at the front of the chassis, there's two convenient holes for 3mm screws. There's a small slot to the side, so a pair of M3x6s with some washers quite neatly trap the wires, keeping them out of the way. Some nylon washers would be better, but as long as you're careful, steel washers work okay too. The switch has just been servo taped to a convenient flat spot, so nothing special. It ends up being just enough to keep the wiring out of harm's way. And that's about it. I was tempted to do a more complex setup with all the blinking lights, tail and brake lights and some custom mounts, but I think this is one of those models I want to keep looking largely box stock. I like the way it looks just as it is. I think if we ever manage to find a red WildOne to build, we might go all out with the tail lights and a roof bar, maybe an underglow, basically all of the lights. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. The next over-the-top electronics in a model is going to be the WPL E1. I'm just waiting on some custom PCBs to turn up, then I've got to write some software for it. Should be fun and very bright. Anyway, that's the WildOne Blockhead lit. There's only one more thing to do now, and that's sort out the battery so we can keep all the wiring internal. Oh, and there's of course the window nets to add too. So, as always, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a message if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!